Hi, I'm Chuck Dorsett for Weaver Leather Supply and Moo. Let's see if we can add a little bit of hip into leathercraft. We've got a cow here that's a little less than happy, and we're going to turn this into a beautiful journal cover. All right, so anything I use in this video, weaverleathersupply.com, or check below. We've got links there, going to take you straight to the website. Also, if you want to know when our videos release, just click your notifications. You'll know exactly when these come out. So step one, let's jump over to our pattern table, talk about some artwork. We've got a great video on making a journal cover, so we're not going to go into specifics, but we will hit each and every step. So what we're going to do here is concentrate more on our design. Now our pattern, it's as simple as this. For our main body, we're at 19.5 by 11.5 inches, or roughly 49.5 by 29.2 centimeters. Now we're going to go with a 4 to 5 ounce leather. The reason I say that is because this is cut to our basic spiral bound notebook. If you want to bump that weight up, say maybe a 7/8 or an 8 to 9, I might add a ½ an inch there on our length, simply to give that leather more room to bend. Now on our pocket, we're going to cut one face, but we're going to cut two pockets. We'll cut these oversized or overcut, so when we lay these in, we'll taper glue these, and then we'll trim to size. Makes it very easy to get all our edges to line up. So on this, 12 by 5, or roughly 30.4 by 12.7 centimeters, and again, cut two here. Now, we're going to make this easy on ourselves, because I am not an artist. Painting is not in my wheelhouse. So what we'll do is we're going to cut our design with our swivel knife. So therefore, basically, we've got a good V. We'll dye the whole project black. Then when we come in with our paint, all we have to do is paint right to the edge of our swivel line. There we go. So that actually gives us a border. So we paint right off that edge. Look at that. We get a perfect clean line every time. So again, we're going to make it easy on ourselves if we're not artists. Okay, let's reset here, talk about our design. I am going to do my best not to run this scene out because there's so much to say here. Unlimited possibilities. And if you don't feel like an artist, we don't have to be. We have this asset called Google. Right here alone, all we have to do is type in graffiti, lettering, free clip art, and we are going to get more possibilities than we can use. With our computer, we can print that out. On our copier, we can enlarge or decrease that to work into our design. So therefore, all kinds of options there for help. Now, here's a very big point, copyright. We don't want to copy something someone else has done. Well, if we do it, say it's for us or a friend, say a gift, no problem. When we start exchanging money, then we have an issue. So this is absolutely original art. Now, how do we create this? Here's how I do it. Okay, we can go with software, absolutely, but I love to pick up a pen, some paper, and some templates. Let's just see what happens, all right? So overlays. What I'll do is on one piece of 8.5 by 11 paper, I'll draw in Moo. Second one, probably my cow head. The third, maybe the cow and the fence post, or the body and the fence post. The point I'm getting at here is I'm going to lay these down, all three. I'm going to use a light table. Now, if you don't have one, we've got a great video on one. In fact, it shows you how to create one at home with simply things we have around the house. The point is, I'm creating my final from different elements. Makes it very easy. I can work all of those around. So therefore, I can now draw out my final. Here's a big point. This needs to be as accurate as we can make it, because when we transfer this over to leather, it's actually third generation. I want these lines as clean and even as I can make them. Here's a funny point. Every piece on this is done with a template. So like right here, the side of the cow's face, there's that line. With our round template, all kinds of places I've used this. Like our nose right there. There we go. There's our nose. There's the outside lines. Right here, there we go, there's the connecting lines. So if we use our templates, we can make a very accurate drawing, okay? Next step, let's do this, let's tape this down. Now, we're going to jump over to tracing film. So this has got a matte side and a gloss side. I want to draw on my matte side. So let's lay this down over our final. Tape that in, there we go. So again, I want this to be as accurate as I can make it. So what I'm going to do is every line on here, I'm going to use my template. Now, here's a cool little thing we can do, like the O's. I don't have a good template for that O. So let's do this. Let's make an O with our poster board. I can lay as many of these in as I want, and they're all going to be exactly the same. So let's start right here. I'm going to drop this line in. Now, this is going to take a little time, absolutely. But let's take that time. Let's make this as accurate as possible. There we go. All right, so we are transferred over to our tracing film. Again, software would probably be a little bit faster, but that kind of takes the fun out of it. Okay, so there's our final on our tracing film. Let's jump over to our main table. Let's cut some leather. We're going to go with a 4 to 5 ounce veg tan. It's going to be a little bit of a softer journal cover. This is our Weaver Select, and I absolutely love this leather. It's my favorite leather. I want a quality tannage for this project. This is going to look good. Now, I'm a crafter, so sometimes a full side budget says no. Well, we've got this in 12 by 24 inch panels as well. Our face will absolutely come out of one panel, but we'll have to jump over to a second for our pockets. But also, again, we're going to overcut these. So the size here is going to be a little bit different. We're going to dye in black, so we can absolutely go with a pen. So let's draw in our main body. Good. Let's trim this out. Good. Now on this piece, we're going to add our round corners. Now if you're not comfortable cutting a round corner, let's just make a series of small cuts. There we go. That looks good. I'm going to do the same thing on the other 3 corners. Well, there we go. Those look good. Very professional. Okay, so this is ready to go. Let's jump over. Let's cut our panels, but remember, we're going to need 2 of these. No round corners because, again, we'll trim to size. And our pockets are cut. Okay, let's reset here. We're going to bevel and groove our edges on our main body and on one side of our panels or pockets. On our main body, our main panel, we're going to groove and bevel all the way around. This will be a little bit different on our pockets. So I'm going to set my groover right at 1/8 of an inch. To me, that's a good distance from the edge to our stitch line. Not too far, not too shallow. Now, if you're not familiar with a groover, this is actually going to cut a groove into our top grain. Gives us a beautiful guide for our chisel. That's going to be very consistent and straight. But secondly, by cutting a groove in our top grain, that's going to allow our thread to sink down in. That's going to reduce the risk of our thread snagging or grabbing on anything. Okay? Next step, let's jump over to our Master Tools edger. We're going with a 4 to 5. So this is a number 1. Let's edge all the way around. Now, if you have a little trouble getting around tighter round corners, we can do the same thing we did with our knife. Let's just make small little cuts around that. There we go, and we'll never see that. On our panels, we're just going to do one side on these because what we'll do is we'll lay our edge that's got our bevel and groove on it to a mark, then we'll trim this outside. So that's why we're only going to do one side on these. Very nice. We are ready to drop in our design. So let's take our main panel over to our pattern table. Let's add our design. We're not going to fully case our leather. If we were going to tool this, absolutely. But all we're going to do is drop in a swivel cut simply to make our painting easier. But nonetheless, we do want a consistent moisture content in our leather. I don't want my swivel knife to move from drier to wetter to drier. That's going to give us an inconsistent line. So let's do this. Let's just take our sponge, and let's make slow, deliberate passes so that we get this as consistent as we can. But we're going to give this a couple of minutes. Let that water wick in. Well, there we go. Now it's not perfectly consistent, doesn't have to be. We're going to give this about 15 minutes, let that water wick consistently across our project. So let's give that a few minutes. We'll come back, drop on our design. Our leather looks good. Now it's a little bit wet down here, but that's going to pass. But we need to make sure we don't get confused here. I've done this before. Let's look at this. Okay, so if we're going to open our journal cover like this, this is where our design needs to be, as opposed to this side. Whoop, there we go. So let's lay this down. Now it's a larger piece of leather to trace and to work on. So let's take 2 little loops of our painter's tape. Let's drop those on the flesh side and tape that down to our work surface. Good, so that'll keep that end of the leather from moving around. Up here, let's take our design. Now this is exactly 8.5 by 11. So therefore I'm going to center this. So it looks like I've got about 3/8 of an inch, 3/8 and 3/8. Good. If it's a little up, down, left or right, it's not going to matter. But over here, I don't want to put tape on my tracing film. So let's take a piece of our scrap film. What I'm going to do is put that under my drawing. So therefore the drawing is actually taped down. There we go. Let's do the same over here. Now the nice thing about this, there we go. The nice thing about this is there's a lot of drawing here, but I can always lift this up to see where I am. I don't want to do any double lines. That'll stand out like a sore thumb. Now let's trace this onto our leather, and again, let's use our templates to make sure our lines are as accurate as we can make these. Now, for the most part, I'm going to use a template for every piece, even my straight lines. There we go, I'm going to use my template. The point there is just to get this as consistent as possible. Though there are areas that we can freehand. That's supposed to be very imperfect. Or like right here, the tufts of hair, same thing. So let's draw those in freehand. Okay, well let's see how we did. Well, there we go. We know exactly where our swivel cuts need to be. Now I can double check. It looks to me like we've got every line. Now we can absolutely line this up again. It's relatively easy to do. But let's do this. Our next step is our swivel knife. Now we could certainly go another direction. We could go with a groover. Right, let me untape that. Now we could go with a groover. If you take this little bar, the guide bar off, it becomes a freehand groover. Well, that groove's going to be a little too wide. Well, maybe not so much wide as maybe shallow. I want to be able to paint off the edge. Again, not an artist, so that's going to be a big help. Now, if you are an artist, you could absolutely go from right where we are, add your paint, or you could go with a scribe. We've got our sharp end and a ballpoint on this, so we could make a pretty decent line there. But for the most part, very easy to do. So our next step, let's wet our leather again because now we're going to swivel this. All right, our leather is wet again. Let's give this 15 minutes. While we do that, I'm going to reset here. We're going to cut with our swivel. Our leather is ready to swivel. Couple of points right up front. We're going with a 4 to 5 ounce. So we don't want to cut so deep that we actually create a weak spot in the leather. Well, we don't really have to. We're simply painting. But secondly, if you're new to the swivel knife or tooling, we don't have to freehand every bit of this. In fact, it's imperative that our lines are clean and consistent. So we can absolutely use a template to cut. Now, some of this we can't necessarily use a template on. Let's do our best. Let's take our time because cleanliness, that's going to affect the overall outcome. Now, we can always use our square, and I love this. The problem with tooling, though, is it's very easy to ding our leather with this. Over here, not so much a problem. So let's start right here with our first fence post. Good, that's all we really need. Now, when we jump over to these lines, we can absolutely use our template to cut here. Good, now that line is very clean and consistent. That's what I'm looking for. So I'm going to swivel the balance of our design. And there we go. Okay, perfect? Yeah, not at all. Doesn't matter. The 2 points here, let's have fun with it, and it's going to look good anyway. We can absolutely re-wet our leather if it starts to dry out. So our next step, we're going to dye this in black. That's going to cover up some mistakes. Paint will do that as well. So we've got that going for us. So let's give this overnight to dry, then we'll jump over, add some black dye. There's a number of ways we could dye this. We could absolutely go with a dauber. That's going to take a lot of time. I love our dressing sponges. In fact, there's the full sponge. I tend to cut these down, make them go a little bit further. Right here, just a cheap plastic trash bag. And this is actually some of our shipping paper. If you've gotten a roll of leather, this is durable, makes a great pattern, very absorbent. Best part, absolutely free. Now, we're going to dip dye, simply because to me, that's the easiest way to go. We're going with black. We can't mess this up. Yeah, very forgiving. So let's take our main panel and just run that through our dye. So again, with black, no worries about streaking. But again, I'm going with the Pro dye. In fact, I should have that bottle out here, but let's get this piece dyed, lay this out. Now let's just absorb some of that excess dye. There we go. Okay. Here's what I was talking about. So I should have a nice bottle out here. We're using the Pro Black. Here's the point. That's my bottle. So yeah, we don't typically put that one on camera, but nonetheless, it's the Fibings Pro Black. It's the only dye I use. So let's set this aside. There we go. Let's set that aside. I'm going to dye the 2 pockets the same way. And there we are, black. The timeless classic, going to cover up all kinds of mistakes if we have them. And we've got a few. But all told, I need to give this maybe 2, possibly about 3 hours dry time. So let's give this some dry time. We'll come back. We'll start painting. Our leather is dry. In fact, it feels dry to the touch. Good, we're ready to paint. Now, a couple of quick notes. First off, dip dyeing. It's going to take more dye. And we need a larger bench. Say we're doing a large project. But at the same time, did you notice how fast it was to dye this? It's going to be beautifully consistent. We covered every bit of this project. The holes, the edges, the flesh side, same on our pockets. But here's another great point. I don't have a single drop of dye on me or my clothing. That's a big point when we're dyeing leather. Doesn't have to be messy, time-consuming, or expensive. And our cleanup, little 99-cent funnel, and we are going to have a bottle, yeah, that looks like that. But nonetheless, very easy way to go about dyeing our projects. Let's step over here, do some painting. I've switched over to a t-shirt because I can dye this entire piece in black, not get a drop. The second I pick up a paint bottle, I'm covered in it. But we're going to use the Angelus paint. We have got a wide selection, and these are some of the most beautiful colors I have ever seen. But the big point, acrylic. So therefore, any point we have a bad miss, let's just get a little water on a rag, and as long as we get there quickly, we usually can clean that off and we'll never see it. But also, we've got our swivel lines. Let's just take our time and have fun with this. Now, here's the original Angry Cow journal cover. Well, looks great. When we look closer, we see some misses. We see some spots, some holidays in our paint. The point here is this. This does not have to be perfect to look good. So let's enjoy this. All right, so right up top, in fact, let's look at that again. This is our gift box blue. So let's start with our lettering. Now on our brushes, I'm going to use a smaller brush. We can always bump up for larger areas, but let's start with the smaller for our edges. Now, most of this is going to take probably 2 coats, maybe 3 for the white. So let's get a coat on, let that get good and dry, then we'll come back and paint. But one thing I'm bad about is trying to paint everything at once. What happens is I'll set my hand down in something that's not dry yet. Now I start painting over here. Yeah, we're going to try to avoid that. So let's start right here, get some paint on our brush. Now again, with our swivel line, let's just paint right up to that edge. Good, there we go. And right here, same up top. Let's go right to that edge. So that's not a perfect line, but it sure looks good, doesn't it? Okay, so I'm going to finish out the balance of Moo, at least the front. Then we'll switch over to our turquoise to paint in right along the back side of the letters. And there we go. Well, there's one pass. We've got some good coverage. I'll let this dry and then come back across with one more pass. Now, a good trick. Say we get a little too much paint down in our swivel cuts. All we have to do, let's take one of our craft knives and then we can scrape that paint right out of that swivel cut. We'll never see that because we're just scraping through the black dot. But it's a good way to cure a problem if we have a little too much paint. Okay, so I'm going to let this dry a little while. Repaint, then we'll jump over to our next color. Our second coat is in, and all told, that looks good. Really, our second coat was more filling in, but also a nice touch here. We're going to have that nice border line between all of our paint colors, so that's really going to help make those stand out. So our next color right here, we're going to go with turquoise. Ready to go. So let's paint our letter sides with our turquoise. And we got a little overzealous with our paint there, but that is okay. Well, that's looking good thus far. Very nice. Now, big point, go with any colors you want for this. Make it your own. Now, next, we're going to jump over to our white. We're going to give this just a few minutes to dry. I'm going to reset with my brush, get some white paint out. Let's paint our cow. Our white is ready to go. Now, we're going to paint our cow. On black, this is probably going to take 3 coats. 2 and then 1 to fill in. But also we've got to remember, actually I've got a little turquoise there. We can, if that really sinks in, we can use some deglazer and that'll take that right off, but we're going to paint over that. Probably for me. Amazing I don't have paint all over me yet. But with our cow, we're going to have some brown spots on this. So we need to watch for that. So let's start with our white. But have you noticed too, since we're painting off the edge with our swivel cut, how easy it is to get a good straight line. There we go. If we just take our time, this is going to look good. All right, so I'm going to paint the inside of my cow, face and legs with our white. Probably 2 coats, but most likely 3. We've got 2 coats with a 3rd coat simply to fill in. Now, I might could fill in just a little bit more, but to me that looks pretty good. Nice vibrant white. Here's a problem though. I've made a mistake, and I hope you were paying attention because evidently I was not. We've missed, or I've missed, 2 small lines. Notice right here, the 2 lines between the ear and the head. They're not here, okay? If we were tooling, that would be a major issue. We're not. We're simply using our swivel for a guideline. So let's do this. Let's come back in. Let's find that diameter of hole. Yeah, there we go. All right. Let's bring this in. Now with our all we need here is a border line. So with our awl, let's trace this in, make a couple of small passes. There we go. Not bad at all. I'm going to do the same thing over here. There we go. That's all we really need. We just need a border there. Okay, with a smaller brush, we're going to paint the whites of her eyes. We're not going to paint the pupils. We'll leave those black. But let's paint the white here and the small area we just cordoned off. Now those areas a little hard to get to, so don't hesitate to use your craft knife if you need to clean out a little paint. Okay, our next step, our teeth. I'd like to come in and paint, say, a base coat of pink and then our teeth, but I want that, there we go, I want that missing tooth very visible. That's a nice touch, right? So let's just paint the tops of our teeth and leave the borders black. Well, Picasso, I am not, but nonetheless, that's looking pretty good. Okay, one last step with our white. Let's add a little flair to the edges of our letters. Now, I didn't go into great detail on these two little swivel lines, but we're just going to drop some white right down the middle. Let's see, we've got 4 of those to do. Okay, there we go. That's a nice touch, isn't it? Good. We're done with our white. So let's give this a little time to dry. I'm going to clean my brush. We'll jump over to our next color. Let's go with our pink now. So on her ears, we're going to drop in our standard pink, but let's change it up a little bit. Down here, let's drop in a hot pink, and let's hope that isn't an utter disaster. So on her ears, let's start right there. Well, there's one coat, each color. We're going to give that a few minutes to dry. We'll do a second coat, but have you stuck your hand in wet paint yet? Yeah, I'm doing my best not to. But let's give that just a few minutes to let that paint dry enough. And all told, it just takes maybe 15, 20 minutes to get it dry enough to where we're not going to stick our hand in it. Well, very good. The pink looks good. I like the combinations there. All right, let's give this a few minutes to dry. Jump over to our next color. Our paint is dry. Thus far, it looks good. And in fact, the lighting just not doing this justice, but I'm happy with it thus far. So we're going to go with the brown. We're going to finish out our cow. We could absolutely go with brown, but it's a little bit dark. It's going to be even a little bit darker when it's surrounded by this black. So why don't we start with orange and let's add a little brown in there. Let's mix that orange up so we get more of a rusty looking brown. Let's add just a touch of brown to this. And let's mix these together. Let's see what it looks like. Well, there we go. So basically we've got just a little more of a reddish brown. That's going to look good on our cow. So let's clean out our brush because that's now a mess. Okay, our first 2 steps, we're going to do a lot of brown here. So our first 2 steps, let's do the tuft up here and our eyes. So tuft, eyebrows, and eyelids. Nice. I love that brown. Good color. Okay. Next up, we have a chin, nose, and we have 4 spots on our cow. And there we go. Looking good. Don't hesitate to jump back. Like right here, if I've just got a little bit of a lighter spot there, no worries. Let's just jump back, add a little more brown. Okay, last step with the brown. Let's jump over to our hooves. Okay, well that just looks great, doesn't it? Now, if yours isn't perfect, mine is not either. That's not the point here, but it looks great. The swivel, big help to us. Okay, I'm going to clean up because now let's jump over to a beige for our fence posts. For our fence posts, I don't have a good beige with me, so we're going to mix 3 colors now. We're going to go with white, yellow, and a little bit of brown. Now, I didn't go into great detail on our brown. That's going to be roughly 4 parts orange to 1 part brown, but mix these however you want. But again, go with any color you want. So with this, we just are going to paint our 2 fence posts. So we don't need a lot of paint out here. But again, let's go about 2 parts white, maybe 1 part yellow, 1 part brown. Let's see where that gets us. And I'm already making a mess. Actually, I'm surprised I haven't made a bigger mess thus far. So there we go. We've got a little bit more of a dusky beige. Actually, that's perfect for our fence posts. Okay, so let's start on this side. Well, there we go. Okay, our fence posts. Those look good. Nice color there. We've got one more color. Then we're going to add a top coat and come back to our barbed wire. You'll see why very shortly. So I'm going to clean up. Let's go with a nice bright color for our grass. So on our green, let's go with a good bright green. This is the emerald green. Now we don't need too much here, so I'm not going to worry about putting some on a scrap of our tracing film. Let's just paint in our grass. And in fact, let's jump over to a smaller brush. Let's see if that'll help us out. And there we go. You know what? Very happy with the angry cow here. I think we've got everything. Now, I've been wrong in the past, but I believe we've got it all. So let's give this overnight. Let all that paint dry very well. Then we'll add a top coat. Our paint is dry. That looks good. I almost want to come back and add just a little more touch up on our white, but all told, I'm happy with where it is. Now for our top coat. Love the Satellite. 2 good reasons. First off, it's a spray-on. For painted projects, we're not buffing or rubbing. Now our paint's plenty dry. Not worried about that. But secondly, it's going to give us the same gloss on our leather or our dye as it does on our paint. Now the downside, big ventilation. We've got to have ventilation with this. But secondly, there's a couple of tricks to make this work just right. So you know what? Let's do this. Let's jump over to our leather balm. We've got no tricks here. This is going to look great. So I've got 2 rags, 2 cotton rags. They're both dry, but I'm going to call this one my wet one because I'm going to apply with this. With my dry rag, I'm going to buff off my leather balm. So let's start down right at the right bottom, and we're just going to add this sparingly. Good. There we go. Okay, so let's come back to this end, take our dry rag, and let's just lightly buff. And we're going to see a really pretty gloss come through. Yeah, there we go. That looks good. We don't necessarily need a plastic bag under us when we're doing this. I just needed something besides black so we could actually see where our project is. But all told, that looks good. Nice gloss, okay? I'm going to do the same thing to these 2 panels. Then we'll jump over, add our barbed wire paint. Okay, good gloss on both of these pieces. Let's jump back over, drop in some gray paint. This is the toughest part for me because we're going to drop gray into our swivel line cuts. Now, we're doing this after our top coat because if we get a little overzealous, and I will, I can simply dip my rag in some water and that's going to wipe right off because of the top coat. But really the best route to go, and again, the big rule here, this does not have to be perfect, and it's not going to be. But let's just do our best to see if we can get some gray down in this swivel cut. Okay, there we go. Not great, but not bad. We're just looking for some level of consistency. So now let's get our barb. Okay, there we go. Well, there's one down. It's not perfect, but it looks pretty good. Good, so I'm going to do the other 5. Okay, well, it's not perfect, but that's looking pretty good. Let's step back over to our main table. We're going to give that paint just a minute to dry. Then we'll do some top coat on that. I've given the paint about an hour, maybe an hour and a half to dry. So let's come back in just with a little top coat. Let's seal this paint in. And let's buff that off. Well, there we are. Looking pretty good thus far. Okay, I'm going to reset here. We're going to glue on our pockets, get ready to chisel. We've actually cut our panels at 5 inches wide, but we're only going to come in 4.5 inches. That's going to give us room to trim. So our first step here, let's come in 4.5 inches or about 11.4 centimeters from our edge. Let's make a mark there. Let's do the same on the other 3 corners. Good. Now, we could certainly use our S18, and I love this glue, but in all honesty, our tape's going to work great. Now, this is good for chromes and lighter weight veg. I wouldn't take this too high, like say for a holster. That's not really going to hold. But I've got my mark, so let's take a piece of our tape, come from that mark out. Good. Now let's do our length, other side, and the same on the other end. All right, we've got our tape on. The trick here, try to scrape that back as opposed to peeling. There we go, and that's going to lift right off. We could always use our white glue. This is a great glue, the Leathercraft Cement, because really all we're doing here, we're just tacking this down long enough for us to get our chisel line in. So let's take our pockets. Now we need to be careful here because we've got an edge. We've grooved and we've beveled our edge. So let's lay that on the inside, top to bottom. We don't really have anything in here that's going to need to be centered. So really we can drop that. If it's a little long or short on either end, doesn't matter, we'll trim that out. So let's press that down, do the same thing on the other side. All right, there we go. So let's get our Poundo board back out. Let's trim these to size. That tape sticks well, very nice. Now with a new blade or a sharp blade, I'm actually going to use the body as my straight edge. Good, just like it was die cut. That's what we're looking for. We can hit this with a little die and we'll never see that. So on our round corner, good. Now let's cut the other 5 sides the same way. And it's as easy as that to get our edges to line up perfectly. Good. Let's step over to our punch table, drop in our chisel line. We can simply chisel the pockets on. We're going to sew all the way around. Gives it a very good look. But that brings up another point. In fact, let's start on this end. Let's grab our 2 chisel or our 2-tine chisel. We can see the edge of our pocket there. In a perfect world, I would like to straddle all 4 of those corners. Well, we can, but what's going to have to happen is let's go ahead and put in 2-tine chisel here. One on the pocket, one off. Same on the other 4 corners. As we approach those with our chisel, we can stretch or contract the chisel line to hit that right on the nose. You know what? With an 1/8 inch, we've got a 50-50 chance. So let's start right here. Let's take our 6-tine. Now I'm gonna straddle that. So I know I've at least got one corner that straddles, but let's drop that in. Feel for chisel or tine holes, we've got them. Very good. Now we've got a good black project here. Going to be impossible to see, but my next step, I'm going to take my first tine, drop that in my last hole. I'm keeping this in my groove line. There we go. Good, I can find my tines through. Let's just work our way all the way around. Now, I've been a little short on specifics about going around a corner and whatnot, but really those are in most every other video. We're more concentrating on our cowl. But good, we've got our chisel line in. Let's step over. We're going to add a beautiful stitch line. Let's start with just a little extra padding on our pony. We're going to be moving this around, and I don't want this to ding my impression. That's just a cotton rag and some painter's tape. Now for our thread, we've got some great choices. Our Ritza Tiger thread. Well, that green, that's almost a perfect match for our grass color. Beige for our fence post, or brown. Well, in this case, that's a little bit darker. So let's go with a nice bright white. That's going to tie this in nicely. Now I'm going to go with a 0.8 millimeter. A little bit larger project. That's going to stand out nicely. We could take one piece of thread, sew all the way around. Let's don't do that. Let's make this easy on ourselves. So what I'm going to do, from my panel, I'm going to start from the second hole in from the edge. This will make sense. So I'm going to sew down to the second hole inside this panel. Therefore, I can hide my knot. When I circle back around, I'm going to stop at the second hole, so I hide that knot. We'll never see a back stitch or a knot or a double stitch. So therefore, right here, let's start in saddler stitch. Now we're using our John James number 18, and I'm going to go about 4 times my length. So let's bring that needle through. One needle, first hole, equalize out our distance. Second hole, we're actually going through the same hole with both needles. There we go. Let's push through, make an X, and pull that. Good. Now let's pull that thread to where we see that sink in just a little bit. There we go. All right, so I'm going to sew down to the second hole inside this pocket. And down to our second hole. So let's flip this around. There we go, about right there. So right here, let's come in. On our second hole, I'm going to come in just through one ply, or just our pocket. There we go. Bring that in. Now let's tighten that down, and from this side, I'm going to come through just from the front ply. Same hole. There we go. Now let's pull these separately, and let's tie our square knot right down inside this pocket. So left over right, let's bring that down in, and right over left. There we go. That could be a little easier on the table. I'm just trying to get a good camera shot here. So let's trim that off. Good. Now, let's flip this back around. I'm going to start in that same hole and work my way around to the second hole in on our bottom panel, or the bottom part of this panel. Let's turn this around. Well, there we go. That stitch line looks good. Can't wait to see this complete. So from here, I'm going to start again in my second hole, sew down to my second hole in. And there we go. All right, we're going to our last lap, second hole, and we'll finish out right here. Well, there we go. That stitch line looks good. Let's step over to our punch table, hammer down our stitch line. This isn't an absolutely necessary step, but if we hammer down our stitch line, it's going to close our holes, sink our stitch line down into our groove line, but it's also going to spread that stitch out a little bit. Now, we don't want to hit this hard enough to where we ding our leather. So let's use this part of our mallet. Yeah, there we go. Noticeable difference, right? So I'm going to work my way around. All right, that stitch line looks good. If we don't have a machine, we're not going to let that stop us. Let's take care of our edges. We're done with this beautiful project. We trimmed our pockets to size, so therefore we need to edge, and we need to add just a little bit of dye here. So back to our edger, Master Tools number 1, let's just edge our pocket. There we go. Now on my dauber, I've just got a small amount of dye. We've got a top coat, so we can wipe this off, but let's just dye that edge. Okay, and let's wipe that off, just so we don't have any rub off. Very nice. Okay, let's give that a couple minutes to dry. We'll slick our edge. When we slick our edges, we could absolutely go with water and it'll work nicely. But let's use our Gum Trag, or Gum Tragacanth. So let's put some of this on a rag. Good. Now let's just rub this on our edges. Now let's take our slicker. For our areas where we've got 2-ply, I'm going to go with our largest cut, but when we jump down to our single ply, let's jump down to our middle cut. And we can let this hang off of our table to make that a little bit easier. One good point about slicking, if our corners aren't cut perfectly, this will certainly help smooth those out. All right, let's do this. Let's bend this over, edge to edge, and let's press somewhat lightly on our spine. It's going to take a little while for this to work into our binder to a good fold, but with a little use, that's going to be perfect. So last step, let's drop in our binder. Center that. There we go. Well, how cool is that? What a great project. Could not be happier with that. Love the stitch line, love the paint. Very cool. I hope you've had as much fun as I have with this one. I think this one's going to be popular with friends and family. But the biggest point, go your own direction. Pick your own artwork. Pick your own colors. Have a blast doing it. And I hope your journal cover comes out spot on beautiful. Good luck with your projects.